welcome back to the second part of dealing with grief or not dealing with grief. So thank you for being here on this podcast. We just happy to have you. I've got
MARCOBELLA,
as she's intimately known, and Marco. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about not dealing with grief.
So I guess this kind of started when we lost a member of our choir, and it was the first time that my faith was kind of like not questioned but challenged. So when this young person passed away, it was very sad. She drowned. Her and her cousin both drowned because they were swimming in the river. And she tried to save her cousin, and then they both drowned. And so I remember hearing that news. I was out shopping with my sister, and I met another person from church, and they said, "Have you heard what's happened? This person's passed away." And my initial response, because of culturally growing up, what we said in the first video, is to cry and to just feel the pain, and embrace the pain, and then we move on from there. But then when I was about to have that reaction, I was told, "No, don't cry." I was like, okay, that's strange. Why are we not crying? Because, you know, they're praying for a resurrection. And do you know what? Faith-wise, I 100% was like, okay, I get it, 100% get that. And so then I bottled this up. And that was the first time that I started bottling up grief. And so I bottled it up, and I thought, okay, so when do we get to cry then? What stage? And the family's wishes was that we wait the 4 days, because Lazarus took 4 days to be resurrected. And I 100% respect the family's wishes, because that is their child and they can exercise their faith as much as they want to. I'm just talking about the impact it had on me, and then how I then started dealing with death thereafter.
To be fair, we do have a brother in the church who always says, he's affiliated with us, he always says, if I die,
pray for me.
Pray for me first. Don't put me in the coffin. Pray for me first.
Exactly. Yeah. And do you know what? To be honest with you, we have actually witnessed resurrections. So it's not like it hasn't happened. In our life, which is why I was like, okay, I respect that, you know. But then what that triggered is that, okay, that initial like shock and the initial like, oh my gosh, you know, was kind of, that moment was taken away, and then I bottled that up, right? And I remember going into my boss, and really interesting, you know, I mean, she's a British lady, and I came in and I burst into tears, and I was like, I shouldn't even be crying. I'm not even supposed to be crying. And she's like, what do you mean? Why can't you cry? And I was like, I had to explain to this thing of, you know, 4 days, and she was like, okay, all right. I think she probably thought I was going crazy myself, but she was like, okay, that's fine. And I just cracked on with work. I just like, okay, do you know what? Crack on, and just masked it. And I think the only time we really got to cry was then at the funeral, which was sometime after. But even then, I couldn't really truly bring myself to cry, because I think because I had bottled up that initial pain, it just couldn't really come out as I'd wanted it to come out, or as it normally does come out, or as it had come out in the previous deaths. And then the next death that we experienced, which was, like, for me, one of the most significant losses, because I guess growing up, you know that everybody dies sometime, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you mentioned, and I know you're just about to tell us about that, but I think it's interesting that as you grow older, death becomes more
a part of life.
And I think, I can't recall, because I reckon maybe because I haven't lost that many people earlier on.
Who were significant to you.
Who were significant early on, and so it had a completely different meaning. But now that I'm older, and you realise actually, you know, people do die around you, and even within your family, and close circles.
Yeah. So the next one was our pregnancy loss. It's taken us a while to do this video actually, but I feel like now is like a good time to share this with you, and it's painful just even talking about it now. Sorry.
It's okay.
I think what was hard about it was it came from nowhere. And I didn't even know. I was so naive at that time. And they used to say that I wore rose-colored glasses, like I saw the world through rose-tinted glasses, because everything was positive in my life, and no matter what happened, I was always positive.
Pollyanna.
And then this thing happened. I mean, we waited 5 years to have kids, which was a choice. And then when we then got pregnant, we got pregnant straight away, and everybody was so happy. And I remember just being ecstatic and just like, oh my gosh, super excited. And like, you know, I guess maybe there's not enough talk about pregnancy loss, even amongst women and girls. Like, nobody talks about it. It's like if something happens, it just gets bottled away, and I don't know if it's shame or I don't know what it is. I don't know whether there's this link to if you have a pregnancy loss, maybe people think you're barren or whatever. No, actually, pregnancy loss is actually quite a common thing that happens to women. And when we experienced our pregnancy loss, the lady actually explained that 1 in 3 pregnancies, not women,
I know it's pretty
1 in 3
staggering,
pregnancies can miscarry. And that's a staggering statistic. But she was saying that back in the day, before we had all this technology, before we had all these pregnancy tests that can tell you when you're pregnant within a second of being pregnant, people didn't have that. So actually they just used to go by their monthly cycle, and normally they would wait about a month after missing their cycle to say, okay, I think I am actually pregnant. Not 2 days. With us it's like, oh yeah, 2 days, better take the test. Whereas them it was more like a month, and then it's like, then if their period came, it could have been a miscarriage actually that they didn't know about, right? And so they wouldn't feel that same pain because they wouldn't actually know.
Yeah,
you know, most women wouldn't know that it was a pregnancy loss. Whereas now we know from the instant that we're pregnant, and it's amazing. It's a celebration straight away. You're already starting to think about the nursery, get the clothes, and all this kind of stuff, and you're excited, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, what's your baby gonna look like? So you're celebrating from that moment. So you really have that 9 months. And with us, we found out, we went for the scan, and I had been tracking on the app, like what the baby looks like now. Your baby's the size of this, your baby looks like that. So I knew, you know, what we were supposed to be expecting when we were going for the scan. And I just remember that moment of like seeing that image on the scan wall. And as a mom, I knew straight away
there was something wrong.
The baby didn't look like what it was supposed to look like in terms of the image that I've been looking on the app. Again, technology, right? So that was like, Mark didn't know because I didn't be tracking. You didn't know what babies looked like.
Didn't know.
You didn't know what it was supposed to look like, and straight away I knew something was wrong. And the lady was like, "Oh, let me just do an internal scan." And again, I knew that wasn't right because my sister had babies. I'd been to scans before, and that doesn't happen unless they're worried. So when there wasn't a heartbeat, she was like, oh, I'm really sorry. Yeah. And it was just hard, like even hard to say it. You know, she was like, I think I need a second opinion. She couldn't even really say it. So you need to go up to the thing to get a scan. So she said, what do you want to do? Do you want to go today, or do you want to leave it until Thursday? And I remember us talking and saying, okay, let's leave it a couple of days so we can go and pray and seek the Lord's face about this. So what had happened is that the baby had actually been inside me for a month, right? And my body didn't trigger that the pregnancy had died. And so I was carrying this baby around, and I remember, you know, in that moment it triggered me. I was like, I remember a month earlier when I said to you, I don't feel pregnant anymore. I don't know if you remember me saying that to you. I was like, really strange, I don't feel pregnant anymore. And I just thought, oh, maybe the hormones are balancing out. And so I'm fine now, I don't have the morning sickness or whatever. And yeah, but it was actually, that was probably the moment when the baby had passed away and the hormones weren't increasing anymore. So yeah, and also the night before that, God had actually given me a dream. I do dream things.
A lot.
And I saw a dead baby in my dream. And I didn't put 2 and 2 together. I just thought, oh, that's really random. Yeah, and so what then happened after that is kind of what confused me more, because we're talking about this thing of bottling up and not dealing with grief. So instead of me just accepting and going, okay, the baby's passed away and we need to just take the necessary steps to clean out the womb and that kind of stuff, it was like, okay, but we can pray for resurrection. There's nothing wrong in that either, but for me at that time as a mum, deep down I knew that the baby had passed away, right? and that was it. And this wasn't going to happen. This pregnancy wasn't going to happen. But the people around me were also like, okay, we can we can pray for a reverse.
Mostly Mark.
You and other people.
I think
religious leaders at the time.
I think in that moment, probably I could just say, I remember hearing the news, and to begin with, of course I was astonished. I was startled because it was caught us left field. It just came from nowhere. It was like, everything was going well up until that point. And I remember when I settled myself, the thing that came through for me was, this was my thinking at the time, this is not set in stone, because I haven't talked to God about this, and I can't say, okay, fine, let's just do what needs doing, because I need some time to go and pray, because I know that, anything can happen, anything is possible. But I think the challenge was, because we hadn't had that conversation, and we hadn't had an honest, sort of transparent, where are you? How are you feeling about this? How are you genuinely feeling about this? And where am I? I suppose, at the time, I think I probably, dare I say, imposed myself more, and just say,
yeah, I think it's really tricky when you have a pregnancy loss, because you share this child, even though I'm carrying this child. It's my body, right? But it's still your child.
And I think that's the conversation that was lacking at the time. Yeah.
And what are we going to do moving forward? And then there was this thing of this imposing, the faith. I felt like faith was imposing, because it was like, well, you should have faith that this baby will resurrect, right? And that, as a young Christian, kind of threw me a lot, because I was like, I can also have faith that this baby can resurrect, but I can also accept that I'm going to have losses in my life, and accept that the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.
Amen to that.
And I feel like, looking back, that would have been a better response for me, because of what happened afterwards. So I went on this thing. I went back to work. I ignored what had happened in the scan. Didn't cry. Pretended like nothing happened. And just cracked on. Didn't tell my manager nothing, right? Until the next scan, which was on Thursday. And I was like, okay, just keep it all together, because you never know, on Thursday, baby could resurrect. Yay. Great, there'll be a heartbeat. Okay. Now, developmentally, the baby hadn't developed from 8 weeks. We were at the 12-week scan. So that would have been a tremendous miracle, right? But in the Bible, we know of John, who resurrected in the womb, right? So it's not like this is coming from nowhere.
And again, Mark, not knowing any of his medical stuff, just going by pure faith, like, got no clue what, there's been no development over the past 4 weeks, and it's just like, well, I guess anything can happen either way.
So we went in the second confirmation scan, and then at that moment you wanted to pray, right? And that, I don't know, for me, I'd already done my praying, right? And he wanted to pray over me, and I think the lady must have been Ethiopian, so she might have been like religious. I don't know.
I thought she was English. But
no, not the one to do the second scan.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Yeah.
So this is exactly what happened. So we got into the scan. She checked again, and I remember she told us that, oh no, I'm sorry, nothing's changed, and it's as it was. And I remember in the moment just thinking, this is how I felt. I just felt, well, I am a Christian, and for me at the moment, there's no harm in trying this out, because in all fairness, on one side I've got nothing to lose. On the other side, yes, I'm thinking about our well-being. I'm thinking about how this might have an impact on us going forward in our faith and what we believe, and possibly how we're feeling in the moment. So I thought, well, why not try it? So I just said to the lady, excuse me, if you don't mind, we're Christians and I'd like to pray. And so you were sharing. I don't know what that felt like for you.
I was like having so many flashbacks of that moment right now. I was embarrassed because I didn't feel the same conviction.
Right.
And I felt like I had to allow you to have that, because that was for you, and that maybe was for your closure. And this is the interesting thing about when you lose a child, because it's not just about you. It's not just about me, it's about you as well. So I kind of allowed you to have your moment. If it had been me, I probably would have left it after she'd scanned and said no. And I was like, okay, I accept. And I was ready to accept, And I think it was the holding back, because all my life, when death has happened, unless the resurrection has taken place instantly or after the prayer, maybe within the few hours, it's been okay, we accept and we cry and we move on, right? But then I'm holding back. And then what then happened again after that scan was she gave us the options. She said you can have the DNC sweep, which is to clear out everything. You can have the tablet, which everything just comes out, but that's more painful. Or you can leave it natural and just see what your body does. Bearing in mind that it's been 4 weeks and your body has not triggered, it could take a couple of weeks and you could get infected, and there's all these other things that could happen to you. But again, when we went back with that report, and it was like, okay, well, you know, don't interfere with nature. That whole thing of just let nature take its course. Again, I feel like that was the wrong advice. And being young and so impressionable, and then again in relation to faith, like, well, you never know. Again, there was this, you never know, something miraculous could happen. And I'm like, guys, that messed me up in a big, big way. I didn't realize how much it had messed me up until years later, which is why I'm able to actually talk about it now. But it messed up my entire worldview, and it actually affected my faith because I was like, why didn't that baby resurrect then? Why did I go through all that nonsense? But I'm maybe now thinking about it, like maybe to realize that I need to be balanced in my Christian walk and not be extremist. That actually I was okay just accepting that death and just going, okay, we've lost the pregnancy, feel that pain. Because even when people came over to the house, like half of them were like, oh, but you know, we're not mourning because God can do anything. And then
the other half is like,
oh my God, the pain. And then, you know, then your mum shared that you actually had a brother who had passed away when he was 5 months old. And I was like, what? You know, my mum had always shared that her pregnancy loss, but your mum hadn't. And I was just like, okay, so people have been through this, and no one has talked about it. I mean, your brother was actually alive for 5 months.
I didn't know.
And he didn't even know. And his name was Michael, which is really
Actually, no, I did know. Correction. I did know.
And
I didn't know he was 5 months, but I did know.
Yeah, he was 5 months old in the NICU because he was premature. So I'm like, oh, so your mum actually shared that her pain and how she felt then. And I was like, wow, why do you never talk about it? Why do you never talk about it?
I think maybe it's difficult for people to talk about something that sounds negative.
Because of faith.
No. I'm saying from a point of, for example, if either people are just at the beginning of pregnancy or going through pregnancy, I don't think they really want to have that conversation in case it puts a kind of...
Well, I don't think, for me personally, if I had learnt this as part of just normal generic education at school, I think I would have been just clued up that this thing can happen. Not necessarily that I would have thought this is going to happen to me, but just knowing that it can happen. Because when it happened, I didn't know it even could happen. Do you understand?
Let alone happen to you.
I didn't even know that it could happen, let alone happen to me. Do you know, my sister had all her pregnancies and then they were all great. There was no complications, nothing happened. I'm like, oh, it's all great. You just get pregnant, have the baby, it's done.
I think it's a really good point that you mentioned about one of the biggest lessons for me with all of that has been about, yes, balance, and also the journey of actually valuing everything that we have in life. Yeah. Because sometimes you take it for granted. You know, I get married, I'm going to have kids, and this, that, and the other. You know, and things are going to happen in that linear way where it's like, you know, I plan it and it happens. But then God awakens you to this other side, which is actually everything that you have. It's a gift, and you're blessed to be in that position where you've either got children, you've got a job, you've got a family, a community. You're able to have love.
I would say that. For me, that was the biggest lesson as well from that, was that you don't just have children when you want to have children before. It's God-given, right? And that moment just hit it on the nail for me. But what, I mean, from that, Mark, from that decision of not having the DNC sweep, right? And then not crying, it's just a weird 2 weeks of my life, right? That stage was just weird 2 weeks of my life. So we decided not to have the DNC sweep. Let nature take its course. Nature didn't take its course, guys. No. It was about a week or two. To go back, didn't you? No, what happens is that I then had to now kickstart this thing, right? So I was doing all the Pilates. I was just reading up on the internet of how to kickstart your body to realize that it's had a miscarriage and so that it can clear out. And then what happened is, like, you had gone to basketball that night, and then I remember just having to rush to the toilet, and like this big blob of whatever came out that was like the size of a tennis ball, and I was like, okay, that's it, it's done. Again, naivety. I was like, that's it, it's done. it was painful. I cried. I was like, okay, fine, but at least the baby's out, and you know, it's done. And just even thinking about the fact that it went down the toilet, it's just, ugh.
Yeah.
It's just honestly such a traumatic experience. And then after Mark came back, I was like, okay, I think that's it, you know. So then you have to wear whatever, you have to wear sanitary towel, whatever, to make sure that any excess bleeding is caught. And I remember when we went to bed, just this gush of blood just coming out, and I was like, that doesn't feel normal. And I got up and I was like, okay, maybe it's just a little, and I changed again, and the same thing happened, same thing happened.
Yeah.
Until I had to literally sit on the toilet bleeding, because that was the only way to contain the amount of blood that I was losing. And we had to call the ambulance, and I was like, what is going on? And
that was scary.
One thing after
that was scary.
You know. Yeah. So when the ambulance came, they checked me and they were like, oh, you seem okay, you seem fine, just have some food and just see what happens. You know, if you feel faint, then call us back. And so we said, okay, went downstairs, had some food, peanut butter sandwich. And
kind of like your favourite though, isn't it?
And I remember having to sit down straight away because I felt faint. I said, Mark, I feel faint, I don't think something's right yet. So he phoned the ambulance back and they came and got me and took me to the A&E. And then I remember the doctor coming to me and saying, look, I'm really sorry, but normally we would do this under anaesthetic, but we have to do this now because you could go into shock, because I was hemorrhaging and I was clotting and it wasn't coming out properly. And so he had to basically manually scrape out my cervix and my womb. It was painful.
Yeah, I saw that. I think more than the...
It was painful.
I don't think your second pregnancy, was any more painful? I think that's the most amount of pain I've seen you in.
That was excruciating.
Yeah.
Not only are you dealing with a significant loss, but you're dealing with this physical pain that no one should ever have to experience, and then violation in the A&E, by the way, with just a curtain between you and everybody else, because it was that important for them to do that at that moment. Without any pain medication. And, you know, yeah, I just remember holding Mark's hand and just closing my eyes and just bearing it. But the thing is, even after that, it still wasn't cleared. And I'm saying all of these stages because if you've been through this, you know, just that we've been there and we feel the pain. It's real. It's a real pain. And it shouldn't be minimized either by people who might not have had a pregnancy loss or lost a child.
Do you know what you just made me think of? How that experience then influenced how my approach for the next set of pregnancies.
That's very
where
true.
It's been about, actually, Bethel, you know, what do you want?
That's
how are you feeling about this? You know, what are your thoughts around this? And so it's not been Mark-led, it's actually been Bethel-led, where it's like, actually, you know, I recognise the fact that you're the one carrying the baby.
And it's your body.
And if anything, it's your body. So,
and what's going to happen is going to happen to you.
Yeah, so what do you want to do? And whatever you choose, I want to support you on that.
That is true.
And we'll stand there.
That is actually absolutely
So that's
true.
what that experience is all about. And it really did make a difference.
It made a difference, yeah.
From then on, I was like, actually...
Because you were there and you could see it, and you were even thinking, how on earth are you actually coping with what's happening to your body right now?
Yeah.
And so after that, I was put on the ward, and then they had booked me in for a DNC suite, but I had to wait until the slot was available. And in between that, I had an episode where I fainted, and then like Mark had to press the emergency buzzer. And what was that like for you? Because I was out of it. I don't know what happened. So
Just trying to remember, because I think we've been to the hospital how many times? I don't know, so many times. Because there's one part where you passed out. And I think I got the fright of my life.
Yeah, that was the time.
Was that the time?
When you thought you were going to lose me.
It looked like Bethel just went pale and she passed out. And I do remember in that moment thinking, whoa, it's so easy to lose someone. Like that could have been a moment where she was gone. Just like that. And it just happened in a very simple way. She just, and then out. And I panicked. I mean, I probably didn't show it externally, but I panicked because I was just thinking, oh my goodness, is she okay? Are they going to be able to help her? And I was just numb.
But they did. I mean, like, they gave me oxygen and everything like that. I think I had so much blood loss and there was just so much going on.
And the pain and, you know, everything was just so heightened. She just passed out, but, you know.
Yeah. So, yeah, they brought me back. And, yeah, after that, I did end up getting the DNC sweep. And you know what? After the DNC sweep, I was just so happy they were so far. But I did get an infection after that, because you can get urine infections after that. And I think it was more because of the scraping out that caused that. And it took me like a month to heal after that. So after that whole experience, it took me a month to heal.
Do you know what? You just reminded me something. And I know you're probably going to touch on this later. But prior to that, I'd just been reading this book. I don't know where I found it.
Oh, yes.
But I was reading this random book. And it's called When the Glass Slipper Doesn't Fit. And I think this is linked to kind of like the Cinderella story where it's like, you know, you've got this perfect Disney story where the slipper fits and then she's married by this prince and then they live happily ever after and everything just works out. And so the book is talking about what happens in those moments when the glass slipper doesn't fit and things don't go according to your plan.
And it was actually talking about how as girls, little girls especially, we're grown up on all these princess stories where she grows up, she marries the prince and hunky-dory, everything's great.
Do you know, I just thinking about it now, I remember looking at the cover, and it's not a book I'd normally read, but I think I like the title because we're talking about, you know, when the glass slipper doesn't fit, because obviously coming from a business point of view, it's like when your plan doesn't work. And so I just picked it up and I was just flicking through the page and I was like, this is interesting. And I read through and I remember thinking, Beth, oh my goodness, I've just read this book. You must read this book.
100%. I would say if anyone has suffered a pregnancy loss or a child loss, they talk about that in the book. It's actually the woman's perspective of when she went through that experience. And it was just so current and so real for me at that moment. And it really did bring healing. So I do think that God allowed you to find that. It really did bring healing in that moment for me. But yeah, so for me, I think take-homes from that was that actually I need to decide for myself what I need to do. If I feel that the Lord is telling me that we've lost this baby, I need to be able to grieve that and not listen to what other people want me to do. Like, if other people have their faith and they want to pray, let them do that. But if I have my conviction over something, that it's not going to be overridden by what somebody else wants for my life. Because God does speak to you individually as well, you know, and that dream was very telling. It was a dead baby, right? It didn't show a resurrection of a baby. It showed a dead baby, right? So I needed to just come to terms with that. And so that was one take home for me. But then just kind of linked very quickly to how I then responded to further deaths. When my grandmother died again, my father was very much like, oh no, I prayed for resurrection. I was like, we're going through this again? So we rushed over to Dad's house and we're like, we want to cry, we want to be with you, we want to feel the feelings of the emotions. And it was like, no, we're not crying. I'm like, oh my gosh.
I've seen this before and it doesn't end well.
It doesn't help. This does not help. So we went home, nobody cried. And then the moment I cried was when we were supposed to have gone to somewhere, we couldn't get there. The tickets were just extortionate. And it was the day of the funeral and I wanted to be there and it just burst. I just was angry. I was hurt.
The 7 stages of grief.
Going through the 7 stages of grief. Yeah. I was just crying, screaming. I remember my sister came over. She had the same reaction because on the day when it happened, we weren't allowed to just feel, just cry, just let it out and just be like what we would do if, like, when my mum's side of the family passes away. And the next death thereafter was my grandfather, and I did the same thing. It just became my way of dealing with death. Like, okay, he's in the hospital. He could pass away any minute, but I'm working. Right, I'm working, and I had the option to not work and just go and be, even if I couldn't get in the room, but just be outside the hospital. And I kept pushing it back and pushing. It's gonna be fine. You know, I'm sure I'm gonna be able to finish this day of work. But really, I think I was just blocking out the fact that this was really happening and that he was going. You know, and I just wanted to just not accept it. You know, and then so when he did pass away, again it was like, okay, Grandpa's gone, and then you had this weird reaction. You were like, I don't have the car seat. I was like, what are you talking about? You don't have the car seat. Grandpa's gone. You're like, can you pick up Micah? I was like, because I think you had to like pick up your laptop from work or whatever. I don't know. You were starting a new job. I was just like, this is not the way we respond when somebody tells you that their grandfather has passed away. Like, what on earth? And I just said, Mark, my grandfather's passed away. I'm going to the hospital. Bye-bye. And I just left. And we talked about it later, didn't we? I was like, I don't feel like that was the right response. Like, what was going through your mind?
It's the stuff you learn. I mean, you know, none of this stuff is written in a manual anywhere. It's not written in a book. And I suppose sometimes as human beings, we prioritise certain things depending on the situation and the circumstance, you know. And then you learn from it. And that's what this has been about, where it's like, actually, I made the wrong move there, and I'm just going to learn from it and never again.
I expected you to just put your arms around me.
That's true.
And just be like, are you okay?
That's true.
And the first question you asked me is, are you going to be able to pick up my cat? Are you tripping? Like, what?
That was a trip.
That was a mad trip. Anyway, went to my grandfather's, and with my grandfather, this is where all of the stuff about the pregnancy loss came out, that actually I hadn't dealt with it. I hadn't really sorted it out, and that's why I was now responding by shutting myself off every time somebody died. And so with my grandfather, I spoke to somebody actually. I think there was like a primary mental health worker at our GP service. They said if you need somebody to just talk to, you're going through a difficult time, talk to them. I spoke to them and they were just like, maybe you actually haven't processed your initial pregnancy loss. And they triggered that, and they triggered that journey for me. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes. And so then I started going through all of this and coming of everything I've just spoken to you guys about. And so I said, no, with my grandfather, I am going to deal with it. I am going to cry. I went to his funeral and literally bawled my eyes out. I think people were wondering what on earth. But I literally was like, I'm not holding back. I'm going to feel everything I want to feel. Yeah, I'm going to cry as much as I feel like crying. And no one is going to stop me. And no one is going to tell me how I'm supposed to respond and be in this moment.
Yeah, this is my moment. Yeah.
And so we can hear our baby crying in the background. There's no way of hiding that because it's probably been picked up by the camera. But guys, thank you so much for being there, and thank you so much for listening to this really, really heartwarming session. And if you've been touched by anything, want to talk to us, you've got our number, you've got our email address, reach out. We'll be there to support you. Much love.